Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review, and in this video I'm going to review Mercury Act 1 by Imagine Dragons. So this is the brand new album of Imagine Dragons, and this is a group that in my opinion over the past couple of years has just really gone downhill. I was never like an Imagine Dragons fan, but I remember listening to the track Radioactive that was extremely popular back in the day, and as far as it wasn't a track that I would constantly replay, I would see the appeal of it. It was a track that I enjoyed. So for me, it's with the last two albums, Evolve and Origins, in which they decided to go into a sort of electropop phase, but with some really bland directions of pop rock, and it made for some really embarrassing results in my opinion, for some really awful albums. In no way would I say that either of those albums were like the worst things I've ever heard. I still feel that in some occasions there might be some tracks that might sound kinda okay. However, I would definitely not see the appeal, especially when it comes to the two main singles out of Origins. Like, I cannot understand how tracks like Thunder and Believer ended up becoming so popular and so overplayed. It's just baffling to me. So I've seen people saying that Mercury Act 1 it's a bit of an improvement compared to what they've done before, especially with their previous two albums, and that this is not that much of a bad record, which I would definitely hope that is the case, because it would be really embarrassing to make something even worse than those previous albums. So Mercury Act 1, I don't know, it seems like there's gonna be an Act 2 someday, but with what we have here, it feels like a pretty standard Imagine Dragons album in terms of what it does. We have some really basic and simple structures with some overblown choruses. This album though seems to go a bit away from the electropop stuff a little bit, like it doesn't have many occasions where you would have some really obnoxious and badly mixed synths. It feels like an album that it goes more to a rock direction, and also there are a few occasions where I would say that this album actually takes a few risks and ends up making something slightly different, in a few occasions at least. So what I would say is that Mercury Act 1 is indeed a sort of an improvement compared to the previous two albums that they've done. However, this by itself doesn't really say much at all. I still ended up feeling that this album has nothing really to offer. It is a really obnoxious, bland, and just poorly executed album. And as far as I could recognize that it has some nice elements here and there, this album is not good. Like, I didn't expect much, and for the most part, I think that I got what I expected. So getting into the track list, My Life is a track that in my opinion kinda starts a bit strong. It is sort of a piano ballad that in my opinion doesn't really work all that bad. It has a chorus that it doesn't feel like it's overblown to the mix, so it makes for some nice transitions, and the chorus overall feels kinda nice. The vocal inflections are definitely solid and it makes for a memorable moment. I would definitely prefer though this track with another vocalist, because in my opinion, once again this is another album where in terms of the vocals it's really garbage. The thing that I mainly dislike about Imagine Dragons albums is the vocals. Like, even if there are occasions where I can sort of appreciate the instrumentation, the vocals come into the mix and just ruin the songs entirely. They're usually poorly mixed, like they're extremely loud compared to many other instrumentals, and the lack of effects in some occasions makes things worse in my opinion, because some of the tracks, when it comes to the vocals, they have this raw feel, but it just doesn't sound right. I would much prefer if the vocals would sound much more robotic with many more effects, because what we end up with is a lot of tracks with flawed vocal performances, which were definitely in need of another take. With all that being said though, My Life is sort of a stronger moment over here, but then it immediately goes downhill with tracks like Lonely or Wrecked, which in my opinion it's definitely one of the most bland and most uninteresting moments in this album. It's another occasion where we have a teaser track that plays it really safe. It is such a standard track in terms of what Imagine Dragons usually do, like there is nothing innovative or even eventful about this track. It's definitely one of the most drab, boring and uninteresting songs out of this whole project. And I would say that Monday also goes into some of the same directions, like this was definitely one of the most forgettable moments over here. I can't really even remember anything that is even remotely bad about this song. It was just such a forgettable experience. I think that the album somewhat starts to pick up with the track number 1, which is a weird case because we're talking about a track that is mostly a ballad, and usually when it comes to tracks that go into directions like this, I don't really like them, but I much prefer when this album ends up going into some more soothing directions instead of just having those arena-like instrumentals and vocals that are just overblown in the mix and overperformed. Number 1 feels like a somewhat engaging song that has a nice and memorable chorus to it. Once again, I feel that I would definitely prefer this track much more if it would have another vocalist, but for what it is, it's definitely one of the more interesting moments in this album, especially when it has this really explosive rock side to it towards the end that doesn't really sound out of place. It makes for a pretty decent finisher for the track. Easy Come Easy Go, I would say, is another highlight. It was another track that I wasn't really bothered by it. Once again, like I said, if I would listen to this song from like another band and just executing it more properly, I would definitely see myself enjoying this track much more because it has some nice ideas. I like the chorus, it is pretty memorable. It could end up having some nice vocal inflections that have some nice elements to it. There are two things about this track though that really drag it down. The first one is the final verse that ends up going into those sort of fast rapping directions, which in my opinion they never worked. And I can say this: thank fuck we don't have that many of those rapping portions in this album, because we had it much more in previous occasions, and it definitely made for some of the most cringe and some of the most obnoxious moments in any Imagine Dragons song ever. And secondly, I would also say that this track possibly has one of the weirdest fade outs ever, because due to the vocals being so far up in the mix, including the backing vocals, the track fades out and you mostly have this weird presence of both the main and the backing vocals, while the instrumental is sort of already disappeared, and it makes for a really weird way to end the song because it doesn't sound good. Giants has to be the worst moment over here, without a doubt. Obnoxious synths and this sort of arena-like overblown chorus that just sounds like garbage. The vocals are bad, the overall instrumentation and the ideas give me a lot of vibes of their previous two albums, which just make it sound horrendous. There is also the track It's Okay, which I don't really know what they were trying to do with this one. It sort of tries to be like a feel-good track, but in my opinion it's just an awkward and really bland song that I didn't like it at all. Dull Knives ended up being the most pleasant surprise out of this album in my opinion. This is the most aggressive song out of this whole album, going into a really hard-hitting rock direction, and it's not just bad mixing in terms that this track just sounds loud. There is actually a punch to it, and for me definitely the thing that hurts the most about this track is the vocals, because the vocalist definitely can't scream. It is especially with this track where in my opinion it would feel much more appropriate if his voice was just filled with effects in order to hide how flawed the performance is. He can't scream, and this is way too raw, and you can't hear that. It's not a good performance. So Follow You is the main teaser out of this album. It is a track that plays it really safe. It is a really basic track in terms of its structure and its melodies. However, I would say it's one of the more enjoyable singles Imagine Dragons have released in a while. This one is actually a bit catchy and a bit memorable, and the melodies are not that bad. So in my opinion, it's not that much of a bad song. But this single was released as a two-parter immediately followed by Cutthroat, which is considered, and it is actually, the most unique moment out of this entire project. It seems that this is the risk where it took, deciding to go into a different sound and direction, because this track sort of tries to be like an industrial rock track, but let me tell you something, this is a complete failure. Like, I appreciate that they were going for something different, but this certainly doesn't work. The instrumental is one of the most garbage things I've heard from them. Like, none of the sounds work. It has this awful piano melody, and all of the instrumentals coming together just feel so poorly done. And also the vocals. What's with the vocals, especially when it comes, like, before the chorus, it has this sort of rapping nu metal style that just sounds awful. It doesn't work, it doesn't fit, and he just can't perform in this way. Like, I don't really know what they were trying to do with this track. Did they try to sound like 1975 with what they did with their last album? Because if that's the case, they definitely failed. That was an embarrassing song, especially when it comes to the final minute. Like, it has some moments where it's just a mess. And it simply doesn't work. It's definitely one of the worst moments here. With the two final tracks, we have No Time for Toxic People, which is one of the cheerful and feel-good tracks that, in my opinion, it is a bit catchy, it is a bit decent. And finally, we have One Day, which is a painfully generic acoustic guitar ballad. The sound of the guitar is not good, the vocals are not good. It was definitely an underwhelming song. So yeah, in some occasions I would say that this sort of feels like an improvement in some occasions, but it's like saying that you put a bit of a glitter in a garbage can. It doesn't really help. I admire some of the risks and I do recognize that some of the songs sound good, but yeah, this is definitely not it. I didn't like this album. I'm gonna give Mercury Act 1 a 3+ out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why, and what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.